We are going to go ahead and jump right into our next speaker. Charles Marohn is a professional engineer licensed in the state of Minnesota and a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He is a founder and president of Strong Towns. Marohn is the lead author of Thoughts on Building Strong Towns, Volumes 1, 2, and 3, as well as the author of a world-class transportation system. He hosts the Strong Towns podcast and is a primary writer for Strong Towns web content. He has presented Strong Town concepts in hundreds of cities and towns across North America, and in 2017 was named one of the 10 most influential urbanists of all time by Planet Tizen. Let's give Charles Marohn a warm North Dakota welcome.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. There you are. I was looking for you guys. The first time I was here in Bismarck, the downtowners set up a deal, and we had how many people from the public show up? 4. And 2 of them were you, and 1 of them was a guy I brought with me. The second time, we had about 100. Thank you. This is impressive. Very happy to be here today. My name's Chuck Marohn. I'm the president of an organization called Strong Towns. Years ago, I'm an engineer, I'm a planner. I was working with cities all over the state of Minnesota, and I started to ask questions about why these places were struggling. Why, despite all the investments we were making in infrastructure, despite all the investments we were making in job creation, despite all the things that I was doing professionally to try to make these cities successful, why were they struggling? Why couldn't they do basic things? Why were we having to close the library at 4 o'clock? Why were we having to lay off police and firefighters? Why were we not able to fix the potholes, repair the sidewalks, put in a crosswalk? Why were these things elusive to us? And I started to write a blog. That blog has grown into now an international movement of people who are talking about their cities differently. And I have heard your governor speak a few times. This is the first time I've heard him at length today, and I'm just enthused to not only be here and be part of that conversation, but be part of your conversation here. There's a lot of great things going on. Just real briefly, our mission is to support a model of development that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. When I first started to write, one of the things that we did was to go out and look at developments that I knew and understood and tried to get into the financial implications of them. As an engineer, as a planner, the finances is someone else's deal. But increasingly, I started to ask some questions that are not generally asked as part of a project. For example, this was a road that I worked on. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac, residential homes. There's no through traffic here, no commercial traffic, just some residential homes on a dead-end cul-de-sac. When we did this project, we went out and paved the road. The city paid half the cost. The property owners paid the other half. I asked the question, between now and the time the road falls apart, how much are we going to collect from the people who live here? How long is it going to take us, in a sense, to break even on this investment? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city that long just to recoup the amount of money that we had put into building it. Of course, maintaining it was now our responsibility over and over and over again, indefinitely. Here's another project that I worked on. This one, very similar, residential. There's a closed loop. You can see the dead-end cul-de-sac up there. Again, this one was built in the early 1980s. When this was built, the developer paid all the costs, put in all the roads, the sewer, the water, the sidewalks, all that stuff. It had fallen apart. The city went out and did a basic maintenance project. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, based on the taxes the city collects from the people who live within this development, the only people that really use this road in any substantive way, how long is it going to take the city to recoup what they just spent to maintain this road? The answer is 79 years. Now, of course, the road's not going to last anywhere near that long. So we asked a different question. What would it take if we wanted to, from these property owners, raise enough money between now and the time the road fell apart to actually have the cash to fix the road? What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes, with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. The sewer, the water, the storm sewer, vastly more expensive undertakings. Now, sometimes cities will say, well, you know, Chuck, we know we lose money on residential property. We make it up on commercial. Commercials are cash cow. My initial response to that is always, well, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up on the last 10%. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would think that was a good business strategy. Nonetheless, we've kind of convinced ourselves that if we just have enough commercial growth, it doesn't matter what happens to the residential properties. This is a business park. This is one of those build it and they will come investments that cities like to do. It's got the wide industrial streets, the deep, oversized pipes. The city built this in the mid-1990s. Every single lot is built on today. The city felt this was so successful, they wanted to build the exact same thing on property they own right next door. We asked the question, if we could build the exact same thing for the exact same amount of money and get the exact same amount of investment, would this be a good project? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million. There's $6.6 million of investment in this park. Now, pause for a second. Of the $6.6 million that's there, 4 of those lots are a church. 2 of those lots belong to the school district. It's a bus maintenance facility. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance garage. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance garage. These are all important public facilities, right? We need schools, we need churches, we need maintenance buildings. None of them pay any taxes to the city. Of the remaining lots, the ones that theoretically would pay taxes, every single one was either sold for $1 and or these property owners were given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move into this park. For the sake of our analysis, in order to make the numbers work, we had to assume that every single lot in our new park would be built on within 12 months of the completion of our project by a full tax-paying, non-subsidized entity, and that every single penny of new revenue would go to paying off that debt. If that were the case, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, just to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would need to go up to pay to plow the streets, mow the ditches, provide police protection, fire protection, and all the services that are needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic scenario. Now, the first time I came to Bismarck, it was in the very early days of Strong Towns. We were talking like 2012 or something like that. And I was very proud of these, so I would go through and do about 15 of these, and people would start to cry. It didn't always go well. I found I can make the point in just 3 examples, but let me walk you through this in kind of a theoretical sense and show you what's going on. I apologize to those of you that don't like charts. I'm an engineer, so I think I have an obligation to show you some charts. There's 3 in this presentation, so if you're not a chart person, just hang with me through these 3 slides, all right? Let's say that a developer comes to us, says, I have a piece of property here I would like to build upon. I will, at my expense, build all the residential homes. I'll build all the commercial buildings. I'll follow all of your rules. I'm not asking for any waivers or anything. I don't want any tax subsidies. I am willing to, at my expense, pay for and install all the required roads and streets and curb and sidewalk. I'll put in the pipes and the pumps and the valves and the meters. The only thing that I'm asking from you, the city, the public, is that you will agree, when I'm done making this investment in your community, that you will take over the long-term responsibility to service and maintain it. What would we say? Come on, what would you say? Of course, right? We pay nothing, you pay everything. This is a great deal. This is the ideal scenario, right? But let's say, we're smart, prudent North Dakotans. We have heard of this strong town stuff. We want to do the right thing. So when this money comes in from this new development, what we're going to do is we're going to take the portion that would normally get spent fixing stuff around the community, and we're just going to set that aside here. And every year when the money comes in, we're going to set that aside, and we're going to allow it to accumulate until we get out of generation, and we have to make good on that promise we're making when we grow, that we will take care of this stuff. This is what that looks like from a cash flow standpoint. In year 1, and I don't think I have a little pointer here, so you're going to have to bear with my descriptions. You see, in year one, money comes in. We take that portion, we set it aside. In year two, a little bit more comes in. We add to what we had in year one. In year three, you got a little bit more. Year four, a little bit more, and on and on. You see, a 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. You get out a couple decades, you just had money coming in, nothing going out. You're feeling very, very rich. The problem is when you get to, in this example, year 25, you have to make good on that investment you made way back in year one. What you find out is that cumulatively, the cash flow you brought in is insufficient. And you run in the negative. Now, cities aren't one development, right? Cities are a series of developments, a collection of neighborhoods. So let's say that our developer comes back in a couple years after that first project and says, you know, that worked out really well for me, it worked out really well for you. I would like to do a similar size project. And every other year from this point forward, a developer comes in with a similar size project. In other words, the ideal scenario, nice, steady, continuous growth. It's not costing you anything. All the expenses are paid for by someone else. You're just taking over this promise that you'll maintain stuff over the long term. This is what that looks like. In year one, you've got your first development. It pays in the entire 25 years shown. In year three, you add a second. Year five, and on and on. And you can see, not only do you not have any expenses, everything's brand new, but you're having all this money coming in. You're having growth upon growth upon growth. Your cash actually starts to accelerate upwards. You're feeling very, very rich. And when you get to year 25, the year you have to make good on that very first investment you made in year one, yeah, you got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all the growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money over the long term on every project that you do, the further you go out in time, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to that question that I was struggling with when I first started to write. Why are cities going broke? Why do our cities not have any money? Why can't we do basic things? Why can we find money to do a huge project out on the edge of town, but we can't find pennies to put in a crosswalk where people are trying to cross the street? Why? It's because we live way out here now. We had I'll preface this by saying, if you are a partisan person, dial it down to 2 or 1 for just like 2 minutes, okay? Because what I'm going to say is not a partisan statement, but people who are hyper-partisan can like take it that way. So just dial that component of your brain way down. We had in the last presidential election, 12 months, 18 months, these things last for years now, this very contentious debate over our future. And it was incredibly frustrating for me. I'm going to give you my take on it. What I heard in that last presidential election were 2 70-year-old candidates looking back at the best time of their past, promising how they would recreate that for us today. And whether that look back was Ozzie and Harriet and blue-collar jobs, or whether that look back was an expansive government with the capacity to expand benefits and do great things. They were both looking back at the same period of time. Where is that period of time on this chart? It's right there, right? That's not where we live anymore. We live way out here. We can't think like this anymore. Do you recognize yourself in this chart? Do you recognize your own behavior here? Because this is us. This is not a flaw of the political left or the political right. This is a human shortcoming that we all share. This is why people smoke, right? Psychologists call this temporal discounting. This is why you will go home tonight and instead of going for a jog, you'll sit on the couch and have a bowl of ice cream and watch a basketball game, right? Boy, this is a good game. I'm like enjoying this ice cream. Uh-oh, heart disease, right? As humans, we are wired to highly value positive feedback today and to deeply, deeply discount negative feedback in the future. It is important to understand that about ourselves. I think one of the more interesting things about North Dakota is where you're positioned at today. And I found some of the governor's statistics very interesting and invigorating in light of the fact that while much of the country was throwing a big economic party in the 90s and early 2000s, you were not. You were not. You were having to be North Dakota frugal, right? You were not having the crazy debt fest, the crazy building fest that we see in places like California and Arizona and Nevada and Florida. You were not experiencing that. And it was a source of frustration here. Why can't we grow? Why can't we have the growth? Why can't we get things going, right? But when we look back, you, in a sense, didn't pile up the liabilities that a lot of them did. You're actually more well-positioned. And it's interesting because as I travel around the country and I meet with mayors, council members, other elected officials, I go visit other cities. The cities that are the best positioned today are the ones that 20 years ago were too broke to do anything. It's because they were too broke to participate in the craziness. We live way out here now today, and that's forcing us to do things differently. Obviously, there's some huge implications. The way we have been growing, if we continue with that, makes us poorer the more we grow. The more we experience growth, the poorer we become, if we continue to do it the way we've been doing it. Our local governments are being forced to absorb the costs of our development pattern. Later on today, I'm going to be sitting on a panel talking about infrastructure spending. Today, the President of the United States released the infrastructure spending bill. 1.5 billion, or 1.5 trillion will be the headline number you will see. The fascinating thing about the bill, it's $200 billion of federal money. Where does the 1.3 trillion come from? You, state and local governments. The federal match goes from that 80-20 down to 20-80. It flips. It's a completely different world, and we are going to be forced to absorb the cost of our development pattern. If we want that pipe repaired, we have to pay for that. If we want that road fixed, that money is going to have to come from us. This can't be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, I wasn't invited here to tell you what you already know, right? We're in the state's capital. This is the debate we're having here, right? This is the debate we're having in every city across the entire country. How are we going to get more money? Who's going to pay for that? Where are we going to cut? And who's that going to hurt? It is critical, sitting here today, that we see the third variable in this sentence. The third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in an approach that is functionally insolvent, there's no way that our cities will avoid insolvency. As long as we continue to build in an approach that gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way that our cities will avoid default. Whether that is a hard default, like we see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in thousands of cities across this country, where we're laying off police and firefighters, we're letting our parks get overgrown with weeds, we're closing down our libraries, we're putting off critical maintenance because we just don't have the money. We have to have a conversation about how we build places that are financially productive. What does this look like? The governor today mentioned this model, this snapshot model of the 1930s. And I was jumping up for joy with that statement because when we go back, none of us wants to go back to like burn barrels and tuberculosis, right? Like that's not the vision. But the reality is that we fixed those things, but we threw the baby out with the bathwater as well, right? There is a lot of spooky ancient wisdom in the trial and error knowledge that people gained building cities like this. This is my hometown. This is the way it looked back in 1904. I'm from Brainerd, Minnesota. I got up this morning at 4 o'clock and drove here to be with you today. If you travel 6 hours to the east, you'll run into my place. This is what it looked like back in the early 1900s. And I like to stop and pause on this because when you look at this, it clearly is a very nice place, right? Yet these people were broke, right? These were some dirt poor people. These were some illiterate lumberjacks out in the middle of nowhere, right? They didn't have zoning codes. They didn't have building codes. They didn't have tax subsidies. They didn't get grants from the state and federal government. They didn't have engineers and planners and economic development advisors telling them what to do. How did they do this? You can stack up all the things that we have convinced ourselves are essential to building great places. They had none of them. What did they do? It's really simple. They took the materials they had on hand and they copied a pattern that they had seen work for thousands and thousands of years. A pattern that they had seen work in different continents, different latitudes, different cultures, all over the world since humans began building cities. It's important to contrast this with the way we build today, which I don't think we often appreciate is a huge experiment. To us, this is the way it's done. And back when I was doing engineering work, I would ask questions, and the engineers that were, had more experience than me, they would say, well, Chuck, that's the way it's always been done. But of course, that's not the way it's always been done, right? This is the way it's always been done. After all the advice from engineers and planners and economic development people, after all the subsidies and grants and federal investments and state investments in making great places, here's what this exact same street looks like today. It's a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. And if you want one snapshot of why our cities struggle, understand that there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that little stretch of street right there. There's $500,000 invested right there. Where is the wealth that is going to maintain that generation after generation after generation? I'll tell this story. There's a mood in here. I'll tell this story. I think it's good. I was giving a lecture at a university in Idaho, in Boise, and I showed this picture, and a student stood up and said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you build here in the United States. When we build, we have to build one block at a time. And before we build the next block, we have to make sure that the block we just built, all the gaps are filled in. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We're a very poor country. We can't afford to build this way. We're a very poor country now, too. We can't afford to build this way either. And for a long period of time, that illusion of wealth made us think that this kind of thing didn't matter. We could walk away from whole neighborhoods. We could run pipe all over the place and not have to ask, what's our return on that investment? We could put in frontage roads and all kinds of things and never say, what amount of tax base do we need to actually take care of this? We don't have that luxury anymore. The differentiator between cities that are going to be successful and cities that are going to struggle over the coming generation are the cities that recognize the need to become financially more productive. How do we do this? The first thing we need to do is get rid of our worst habits. Build it and they will come is a fantastic movie plot. It is a devastatingly terrible economic development strategy. We have entered what we at Strong Towns call the desperation phase of this suburban experiment. We're so desperate for growth, we will literally do anything to get it. You look at those cities that are now in the last 25 for the Amazon thing, and you look at some of the things that they are giving away, there's no way they get that money back. There's no way they get that money back. I'm going to show you right now the way that cities build wealth, the way they have always built wealth. And it is shockingly simple. Do any of you recognize this city? Does it look familiar to you? I guarantee you if we went to the Historical Society in Bismarck, there's a photo of Bismarck that looks just like that, right? At some point in the past, this city looked just like that. It's not Bismarck. Fargo, Grand Forks, could be, right? Maybe a few too many trees for Minot, right? Sorry, friends. I love Minot. I've been there. Nothing but good. Could be St. Louis, right? Chicago, maybe. San Francisco, Vancouver. The trees are wrong, like the vegetation's wrong, but you can go south. Like, I met someone from Houston that's here today, one of your reporters at the TV. She's from Houston. Houston started out just like this, Dallas, Boston, New York. At one point in the past, Manhattan looked just like that, right? Every city in human history that was ever built prior to our current experimental way to build cities started just like this. Some pop-up shacks, some hopes, and some dreams. Every single one. London, Paris, Rome. This could be Romulus and Remus standing here, right? They all started like this. We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market crash? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out Wall Street banks? No. A few people lose a little bit of money, they salvage what they can, they move on to the next place. We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. It was the right people in the right place at the right time. And when they were successful, they grow in a very simple to understand way. They grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. And so after 30 years of incremental development, this street, which is my hometown in 1870, will become that street I showed you earlier. And after another 40 years of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and incrementally becoming more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be transformed into buildings of brick and granite. We don't build wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way our communities build wealth is by making modest investments over a broad area over a long period of time. Let me show you how powerful this approach to growth and development is. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see they're the same exact size, the same area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure. They're on the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. That old and blighted block looks like this. In the 1920s, as my community was growing incrementally, the next increment of out were these 3 blocks. Had things continued as they had through all of human history, what would we have expected to see? In time, you would have gotten a 2nd and 3rd stories. The buildings would become more intense, more ornate. Of course, that's not what happened. These were built, then we had the Depression, then we had World War II, then we had a completely new style of development. We just skipped right over these and started building dramatically out on the edge. These buildings have stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over used to look just like this. We got it torn down, and now we have the new Taco John's drive-thru. Everybody was thrilled about this, right? We got rid of blight. We got something that meets our new zoning code. It's got the correct floor area ratios, the correct setbacks. It's got the correct amount of parking, the sign ordinance. The environmental people were happy because it has some green space and some native plants in the stormwater area. The bike walk people were happy because they got a sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right there, but they got that stretch. Here's what nobody bothered to consider. That old, blighted, rundown block, when this was built, had a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, same size area, same amount of public infrastructure, just a different approach to development. It's only worth $800,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development, that incremental way we built cities for thousands and thousands of years around the world. You're looking at it in its infant stage after 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. And we all know what's going to happen to that taco place, right? 20 years from now, it'll be a used car lot. 10 years later, it will be boarded up. We'll be trying to get some type of grant or subsidy to get it torn down and redeveloped, right? We've all been around long enough to see this. In fact, in the years subsequent, here's what's happened to the property values. The city is now collecting 78% more property tax from that old rundown junkie block than that thing that's brand new. That, by the way, was the front cover of our Economic Development Authority, like, end of the year report, right? We're very proud of this. We do the same thing on the edge of our cities. This is our Mills Fleet Farm. Please tell me that Bismarck has a Mills Fleet Farm. Yes? No? Okay. Do you all know Mills Fleet Farm or not? Is this some like form? Yes, right? I mean, I consider you all like brethren. We're all part of the Mills Fleet Farm family, right? Mills Fleet Farm originated in Brainerd, Minnesota. It is from my hometown. We have the biggest Mills Fleet Farm in the world. This is what it looks like. It's a double-sized big box store. There's an auto dealership and a gas station. This is 20 acres. When the Mills Fleet Farm people show up, we just stop the council meeting and ask them, like, what do you need, right? This is the most valuable piece of property in the entire area. This is 20 acres of our core downtown. If you've seen the movie Fargo, which I assume everybody in here has, it is supposed to be a depiction of downtown Brainerd, at least for part of it. Not so flattering, not so inaccurate. We're starting to generate some momentum in downtown Brainerd after many, many years of trying, but it has been a place that my lifetime has languished. Many, many buildings that have burned down or been torn down that are now parking lots. Nothing that has been built in my lifetime. This is a place that has struggled mightily. When we go out to the edge of town and we look at the best of the best of the best, we see a 20-acre piece that has a total value of $600,000 an acre. It's a huge sum of money. But when we go to the core downtown, the same size area, just a different configuration, a different approach, we see value that's 78% greater. How much did it cost us to get that development on the edge? Well, our DOT spent a couple $100 million building a bypass, right? We spent millions of dollars on frontage roads, backage roads. When I was an engineer, I actually designed this backage road here. That was $2.6 million. We spent tens of millions to get sewer and water out to here. Massive investment. How much did my generation spend to get that wealth in the core downtown? Nothing, right? That's wealth that my great-great-grandparents and their peers built slowly and incrementally over time and then bequeathed to us as an endowment of sorts that would just continue to pay back over and over. What happens when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? Someday it will, right? Whether it's 5 months from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, at some point in the future, that will not be the use of that property. What comes next? I don't know, but we can look around and see what happens when this kind of place closes. What's the reuse of those buildings? Whatever it is, there's one thing that we can guarantee. It's lower on the economic food chain than what's there now, right? Whatever comes next is lower on the food chain. In other words, you're looking right here at the peak. That is the peak. Everything from this point forward is down in terms of revenue. There are 134 different properties in the downtown. What happens when one of them loses a tenant? Or someone goes out of business or someone retires? What happens when, in our infinite wisdom, we realize that we have too much retail space and not enough office space? Or too much office space and not enough residential space? Well, these buildings are really flexible. They're adaptable. They can become many things. They can change over time. If the real estate market changes, they can change and adapt. There is a reason our ancestors, and I say that in the largest possible sense of the term, there's a reason why our ancestors built cities in this way. It is adaptable, it is flexible, it doesn't require you to know and be able to predict the future. It is resilient, and it is financially incredibly productive. I've shown you some sites now. I'm going to show you some larger cities just to kind of take this home and show you that I'm not cherry-picking data. A good friend of mine named Joe Minicozy with a group called Urban 3 has modeled hundreds of cities across the country. And every time we have done this, it shows the same pattern over and over and over. What I'm going to show you now, and I like to start with Buffalo, New York, because Buffalo, New York is, if you think your place is ever desperate, Buffalo, New York is desperate, right? Every single year since World War II, they have lost population. It's been a steady drip downward. What I'm going to show you right now is the financial productivity of a place. I'm going to show it in the third dimension. If you think of a farmer going out and spreading seed around a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we'll say that's the most productive part of the field. That's where we get the most bushels per acre. I'm going to show you financial productivity, value per acre. Where do we get the most value per acre? This is Buffalo, New York, a place that has had decades and decades of decline. Can you point to me where the traditional downtown is? And not only is it a massive repository of value, despite the decline, despite the neglect, but it absolutely dwarfs everything around it. We see this in cities of all sizes. Here's a mid-sized city in upstate New York, same kind of thing. Here's a small little town by where I live, around 1,000 people. When I first went here, they said, Chuck, we've got some great stuff happening out here. We've got some great stuff happening out here. These neighborhoods here are terrible. We got to figure out how to get this stuff torn down. And then we showed them where all their wealth is. And all those poor neighborhoods. And all the neighborhoods with the poor people. When we look at these buildings, it gives us a sense of what is actually possible. Right now, we look at this kind of thing as success, largely because we view our cities from behind a steering wheel, behind a glass plane, at 45, 50 miles an hour. You got a Kmart here at $384,000 an acre, a Walmart at $967,000. But when we start to view our cities at 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, what we see is that there's immense potential for wealth creation. You've got an old warehouse converted into a supper club, $5 million an acre. And my favorite all time here, Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. Get out of your car and walk around. I know a lot of you do this because I know we've got a room full of downtown advocates. But have the people in your community do it with you. Get out and walk around. Because what you realize very quickly is that our cities are nothing but gaps. They're massive gaps. And when we think about how we bring these places back, often in our minds, we go to something like this, right? We think of success as some huge thing we do that then trickles down to other things around it. We've been doing that for 70 plus years. Here's what success looks like, right? Here's what success looks like. Little investments over a broad area, over a long period of time. And not only can we do this, every city in North Dakota, every single city in North Dakota has a capacity to build a Jimmy's Pizza. We all do. There is no budget limitation that will keep you from having that type of capital investment. Look at the wealth you're creating. Look at the wealth you're creating. But then step back and understand, look at the opportunity you're creating. The governor talked about young people, not only growing them here, but keeping them here and attracting them here. Young people are not attracted by the opportunity provided here, right? But not only are they attracted and magically inspired, but they will lift your city up with investments like this. These are the transformative investments. And for a long time, these investments have felt beneath us, right? You guys are looking at Jimmy's Pizza going, ugh, that's beneath us. We're better than that. No, we're not. We're broke. And Jimmy's Pizza is an awesome investment. Not because it's going to be Jimmy's Pizza for the next 50 years, but because that's where you start. I've been fortunate enough to do some work in the city of Memphis, another city, again, way, way, way out on the desperation curve. When you get outside of the downtown, you explore their neighborhoods. They're very much like every other city in North America. They've got great old neighborhoods that have gone through long periods of decline, long periods of neglect. This one here was an old streetcar stop. City went through, put a highway through the middle of the neighborhood, ripped out the streetcar line. Without the streetcar stop, without the foot traffic, these buildings just died. Some residents, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, took matters into their own hands. They went out, they worked with the property owners to get the buildings cleaned up, swept out, they swept up the sidewalks, they painted their own bike lanes, they painted their own crosswalks. For one weekend, they invited businesses from around the community to come in and open up in these stores and just show the neighborhood what could happen if someone actually cared, right? The little bit of love and a little bit of TLC, what it could look like. They didn't go get city permission. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections. They just went out and did it. They figured that by the time anybody shows up to shut us down, we're going to be gone anyway. Let's just do this. I wasn't here for this project, but I was out 6 months later. 6 months later, every single storefront, which had been vacant, was now occupied. I talked to one of the landlords. They said they were able to charge double the amount of rent for the last place to go than what they were asking before the project. The city has taken note and gone out and documented 18 new businesses, 32 new jobs, $12 million of property value appreciation in this neighborhood. Total public investment? Zero. We have spent the last 2+ generations, we've spent 70, 80 years investing in large things to try to be a catalyst for growth. We've been searching for that dollar out on the edge of the community. And we have completely overlooked the pennies, the nickels, and the dimes that are just laying there in our core neighborhoods, waiting to be picked up. These are not huge investments. These are small, tactical investments. And the biggest hurdle we have is our own humility, our own ability to see success in a different way. When I wrote that bit about the Taco John's in my hometown, some people became very angry with me. One of my cousins runs the Economic Development Authority. Another one of my cousins runs the Taco John's. Yeah, family reunions are awkward. But the question that they all came back to me was, okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, you know so much, what would you do differently? Taco John's wants to go here, what would you do differently? And I struggled with that question because I did not have an answer. And it took me a while to grasp the answer. The answer was to reject the premise. The premise was, this place is in terminal decline, what would you do? And the answer is, I would not let it get into terminal decline. I would not let this neighborhood go downhill, where the only thing that we can do are things that underperform. We spent a year out in this neighborhood looking at the places where people struggle, saying, how do we start to reverse the decline? We saw the mom walking through the ditch, pushing a stroller, weeds up to her waist. What are you doing? I have to get to the grocery store. I don't have a car today. It's not safe here on the street, so I'm walking here. We saw the elderly woman walking in the middle of the street, climbing over mounds of snow with a walker. What are you doing? I have to get to the pharmacy today. I don't have a choice. I have to go. There's no sidewalk here, so I have to walk here. We saw some kids walking through the alley after a rainfall on their way to school. Why don't you kids walk out here? Why do you walk through the mud? Well, our mom told us to walk through the alley because it's safe. It's not safe out on the street. The cars go too fast. We spent a year out there looking at this, looking where people struggled, doing little tests, little interventions. If we planted a tree here, if we put in a little temporary crosswalk here, if we narrowed some lanes, what would happen? And at the end of the year, we came up with a report called Neighborhoods First, 8 projects that my city could do to arrest decline in our core neighborhoods, in this one neighborhood with the Taco John's. Now understand, my city just finished a project, $10 million plus project to run sewer and water out to the edge of town to create a new business park out at the airport. We already have a business park we built in the 90s. It's not full yet, but this one would be air-oriented, and there's all kinds of tactical advantages with that. Big, sexy project. The cost of our 8 projects, $16,700. Put in a crosswalk here. Put in a bike lane here. Plant a row of trees over here. What happens if we go out and spend $16,700 in this neighborhood and nothing good happens? Nobody says, wow, this neighborhood's moving in the right direction. I would like to move here. Nobody says, well, I'm picking up signals that someone cares. I think I'm going to make an investment in this neighborhood. What if none of that happens? We spend $16,700, bam, nothing. We're out $16,700. We can absorb that. We've learned 8 things that don't work. Next year we go out and we try 8 more things. But I think we've found 8 things that work. And I think next year we can find 8 more. And the year after we can find 8 more, and 8 more after that. Because what we did is we went out without the answer. And we humbled ourselves to observe where people were struggling. And we asked one simple question. What is the smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? And if we do that in neighborhood after neighborhood, year after year, in community after community across this country, not only will we be making the lowest risk, highest returning investments that it is possible to make, we cannot help but improve people's lives in the process. Thank you so much for having me today.